Um, as you can see from the presentation title, the future of teacher education and the future of work. Do they match? So I hope you got your coffee and we're all ready to go. So let's begin by saying, particularly in these times, we actually face a world on the move. In fact, we face a world where change has become so accelerated that we only begin to see the present as it is rapidly disappearing into the past. Disruptive forces are globalizing every aspect of our economy, and this globalization holds enormous implications for the future of education. Now, the world we grew up in is gone. Gone forever are the days where people got low-skilled, well-paying, well-protected jobs for life. Today, workers either have high skills or they get low wages. And even then, having high skills is no guarantee for lifetime employment. So a question to ponder: what are modern skills employers are looking for? More specifically, as it applies to this presentation, what are the skills schools and school districts are looking for when they are hiring new teachers? Now take a minute to ponder that question. And you know what? If you're lucky enough to have someone with you, while keeping a safe social distance, you can discuss this together. So you have 60 seconds. Let's go. Just randomly make a list of everything that comes to your mind.
There is a long list in the chat room, Nikki.
Awesome. 5 seconds to go.
Initiative, motivation, determined, pedagogy.
So typically, there are a few basic requirements when it comes to hiring a teacher. So, like a teaching degree, experience, working with children, knowledge of the curriculum, technical skills, and for secondary teachers, knowledge of specific subject areas. Now, when we are looking at ads for hiring teachers, we see the terms like innovation, collaborative, honesty, respect, trust and integrity, empathy, teamwork, communication, problem solving. And we could add other skills, skills like maybe creativity, time management, communication, motivation, personality, empathy, to name but a few. So while this might look like a simple list of desired skills, when you scrape past the veneer, it's not. And my point is that these are all skills that go beyond traditional educational qualifications and experience. So while an education and experience and degrees may qualify someone to apply for a teaching job, to be successful requires teachers to exhibit a mix of skills that goes well beyond qualifications and experience to what I refer to as employability skills. In fact, it's the soft skills needed to do the job well. So that may be important, or maybe as important, if not more so, than the specialist and technical skills associated with being a teacher. So the question I want to ask is, what are the skills that schools and districts are looking for when they're hiring new teachers? How do schools and districts identify and hire the people who have the right mix of skills and qualities to fulfill the roles and contribute to the organization's success? Now, many teachers have the qualifications and hard skills needed to qualify for a teaching position, but without a well-honed set of soft skills, many of them might struggle to survive the demands placed upon them. So then we may want to ask, what are the essential employability skills needed to get, keep, and be successful in a teaching position? What are the essential skills and attitudes that help teachers get along with their colleagues, make critical decisions, solve problems, develop mutual respect, and ultimately become strong ambassadors for their schools and districts? Now, I believe that employability skills are the absolute foundation of successful teaching careers. Schools spend time and money training staff, not just in specific curricular areas, but also in the general and basic skills mentioned previously. Now, looking at it from the business sector's perspective, in times of high unemployment, employers have far more choice of applicants, so they can be selective. However, this is not the case for education today. We have a serious teacher shortage. To put this into perspective, I am part of the core committee for the UNESCO task force, looking at strategies, especially the use of artificial intelligence, to overcome an anticipated shortage of 69 million teachers worldwide by 2030. Yes, 69 million. Now, there are many factors that contribute to teacher shortage. Things like salary, working conditions, perks, and the state of the economy, job demands, and workload. But that's not the whole story. My son Sherwin earned a Bachelor of Business degree and worked as a digital marketer for 5 years. Then 2 years ago, he decided to change careers, as young people do, and become a teacher. He underwent an intensive year-long program at a prestigious university in New Zealand and did very well. Even prior to finishing the program, he had received several job offers because of the high demand for qualified teachers here in New Zealand. And he started to prepare for the school year excited and eager to go. His first shock came when he started setting up his classroom, his empty classroom prior to the beginning of the school year. He had no idea where to begin. Now, why did he have no idea if he had completed training? So I took 2 weeks to help him set up. So both my husband and I have been teachers as well as school and regional administrators. So we gave Sherwin all the support and help and advice we possibly could to help him get ready. But despite all our efforts, he was absolutely underprepared and overloaded for the demands placed upon him as a starting teacher. To make a long story short, in 6 months, Sherwin went from being excited about being a teacher and working with kids to dreading going to school, specifically because of all the additional administrative work and demands placed upon him by the ministry and the school. And this, combined with the new strategies for teaching maths and science, as well as attending courses for high behavior needs kids, these were demands that he was simply not ready for. Sherwin's comment was, "My teacher training didn't prepare me for this. Why didn't they tell me what to expect?" And yes, he was a newly qualified teacher, so should have absolutely been equipped with the so-called new math strategies and other strategies that he needed to know. As he struggled, we tried to support and encourage him, but it was no use. 2 terms later, he resigned. All that money, all that effort was wasted. Now, it's easy to just shrug your shoulders and chalk it up to as another case of that's just the way it is. But my question is, how many more Sherwins are out there? And why is this happening? Now, I want you to hold on to that question and your thoughts, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. I want to now shift focus to look at today's students. The students that teachers must work with on a daily basis and equip every single one of them with all the mandated requirements needed to ensure they pass the tests, as well as develop the critical skills they will absolutely need to succeed in life. If we are to fulfill our mandate of helping students prepare for their future, our focus must shift to providing our clients, which are our students, with what they need. Which brings me to this very important question. What are the critical skills students need to be successful in life beyond school? And I'm going to give you another minute to ponder and discuss that. Once again, just a random list. As the thoughts come to your head, just write it. Now, we have asked this question hundreds of times in dozens of countries to everyone, from students and teachers to educational and political leaders. And no matter who, no matter where we ask this question, the answers we hear are almost always the same. Students need the ability to solve complex problems in real time. This is almost always the first answer we hear. Secondly, creativity. Students need to be able to think divergently and creatively in both digital and non-digital environments to create novel and useful solutions. Next, they need the ability to think analytically, comparing, contrasting, evaluating, synthesizing, and applying without instruction or supervision. They must have the ability to collaborate seamlessly in both physical and virtual spaces with real and virtual partners. They must be able to communicate, not just with text or speech, but in multiple multimedia formats. And lastly, ethics, action, and accountability, including skills and attributes such as personal responsibility, risk-taking, resilience, a global perspective, understanding other cultures, traditions, customs, and religions, environmental stewardship, and altruistic service. I believe that education is not just about the traditional literacies that are the primary focus of schools today. Education must also be about cultivating in our students the 21st century skills that you have defined here. Now, in New Zealand, the curriculum has done something similar called the key competencies. And these are the skills that are listed there. In the Australian curriculum, this is under general capabilities, which are the skills, behaviors, or dispositions that can be developed and applied across the curriculum. And in the United States, this comes under these skills are strongly reflected in the Common Core State Standards. Now, we may quibble about the language, but basically, these are the 6 essential skills required for living in modern times. And I find it ironic, that we are already 20 years into the 21st century and still debating what these skills are and how they should be introduced in our schools. So I think I can speak for most, if not all educators, that education is not about traditional literacies. Education must also be about cultivating in our students the modern learning skills defined here, skills that need to be taught to every student at every grade level. So if that's what's required of all teachers above and beyond the mastery of content, then there's clearly a disconnect between the demand side and the supply side of skills. Addressing this disconnect requires universities to rethink their approach to teacher training and professional development. It's no longer sufficient for teachers to be well versed in their subjects. They must also recognize that the skills students develop through the process of learning are as important, if not more, than the content. And they must be able to incorporate opportunities for the development of problem solving, collaborative and creative and communication skills into the teaching. Now, these skills cannot be learned in isolation, but must be integrated across the curriculum, embedded in the very fabric of how teachers teach. If this is to become a reality, it requires both the upskilling of all teachers, as well as changing university training programs for prospective teachers to enable them to effectively foster employability skills at the same time as they teach content. Now, for some universities, this will require a complete reinterpretation of the role of a teacher. Traditionally, teachers have been paid for the skill in imparting knowledge. This is anachronistic. The teacher's role is now about teaching how to work effectively. Teachers need to develop these skills themselves, which means we need to change pedagogical training. And this requires significant investment in professional development of teachers and teacher training to enable them to demonstrate the skills we expect them to inculcate in their students. Now, these added employability skills place new demands on teachers who themselves may not be equipped with either the skills or the knowledge and strategies needed to teach them. But there's another factor that we must consider that places further pressure on teachers and widens the disconnect between skills needed and teacher preparation programs, and that is the effects of disruption. In his book, Disrupting Class, Harvard professor Clayton Christensen introduces readers to the concept he calls disruptive innovation. Now, disruptive innovation is change that fundamentally transforms traditional ways of doing things. Disruptive innovation creates new markets and eventually disrupts existing markets. Innovation like digital technology, cloud computing, big data, genetics, smart materials, mobile commerce, social media, biotech, 3D printing, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, robotics, and neuroscience are just a few of the big disruptors in our world today. Now, these disruptors are transforming the way we work, the way we play, how we communicate, and how we view our fellow citizens, and how we live in the world. The primary driving force behind disruptive innovation is the incredible technological development occurring in our world today. Now, these disruptions allow us to do things that would have been unimaginable even 10 years ago. So let's take a closer look at how disruption happens. Disruptive innovation typically starts with the introduction of a new product, but it quickly becomes much more than that. And that's because the innovation results in a fundamental change in human behavior. As just one example amongst many, let's examine the development of the iPhone. So here's Steve Jobs introducing the iPhone in 2007. And it's hard to believe that was only 13 years ago. The iPhone was an amazing new idea for a cell phone. And that's because it wasn't just a phone. It also had a number of other technologies built in, as well as a new operating system that allowed users to communicate with the device using voice and natural hand gestures. It was cool and fun to use. But would it really change the world? Was it a disruptive innovation? In the beginning, it was hard to see the connections between this device and how people live their lives. A lot of people thought that the iPhone was just, the latest hype. But once people began using it, they discovered a whole bunch of new ways of doing old things, as well as completely new things. They could, for example, since people carried their phones with them all the time, they started listening to music. And this meant people no longer needed to also carry like a Sony Walkman, a Discman, an MP3 player, or similar portable music players. So sales of these other devices quickly dropped to zero, and the formerly dominant products disappeared from the market. Then as more and more people bought digital music, the iPhone and the iTunes store and Spotify fundamentally changed the music industry. So people didn't need to buy records, tapes, or CDs. They could buy individual songs and create their own playlists and albums. Then people shifted to playing games on the iPhone. As a result, the sales of portable game devices like Nintendo's Game Boy dropped dramatically. Again, since people always had their cell phones with them, They used them to take photos, which immediately and significantly cut the sales of point and shoot digital cameras. And then people started to watch videos on their iPhones. Very quickly, video stores like Blockbusters started to disappear, and movie attendance started to drop substantially. And people not only watched videos on their iPhone, they also shot videos on their phones, and they started uploading their videos to YouTube, which started a whole new era of video sharing we live in today. Meanwhile, the banking industry was hit by the shift in people's behavior as they moved to doing online banking using their phones. The iPhone soon spawned a whole new smartphone industry built around touchable phones with glass faces. Apple then extended the design of the iPhone by introducing the iPad in 2010. And that's just 10 years ago, and they created an entirely new digital tablet industry. Amongst many other things, smartphones and digital tablets also caused a fundamental shift in the way people got their news and information. So very quickly, newspapers and magazines had to radically change the way they delivered products and earned their revenue. Now, a few years later, almost all the media companies have online editions, and many media companies have stopped publishing printed versions altogether. There were many, many more changes that came from this one development, far too many for me to mention here. But there's one really important one I want to point out. It's a change that no one saw coming, so big that no one could ever have guessed that this one innovation could cause changes so large. Within a few years of its introduction, the development of the iPhone severely damaged the economy of an entire country. You think I'm exaggerating? Let me explain what happened. When the iPhone was first released in 2007, Nokia, a Finnish company, was the world leader in cell phone design and sales. With the introduction of the iPhone, Nokia's sales started to dramatically and steadily decline. In fact, Microsoft bought Nokia a few years back and almost immediately permanently laid off more than 22,500 workers. And at that time, other than Nokia, the logging and paper industries were two of Finland's other big employers. They employed tens of thousands of workers. But 3 years later, after the introduction of the iPhone, Apple introduced the iPad and changed everything. And sales of newspapers and magazines around the world immediately and dramatically started to decline. This hit the Finnish paper industry hard. As a result, tens of thousands of Finnish forestry workers permanently lost their jobs as dozens of paper mills around the country and around the world closed forever. Now, when you're a small country with a small economy, that really hurts. How could changes of this magnitude happen in just 13 years? That's disruptive innovation. The point that has to be made is that the story of the iPhone and iPad is just one of thousands of similar stories that are happening as I speak. Disruptive innovation is turning our world upside down. For example, today, Uber, which is the world's largest taxi company, owns no cars. Airbnb, which is the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. Alibaba, which is the world's most valuable retailer, owns no inventory. Facebook, the world's largest manager of information, creates no content. Amazon, the online retailer, until recently had no stores. Netflix, the world's largest movie house, has no theaters. Apple and Google, the world's largest software vendors, don't write apps. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. All of this has happened in less than 13 years. And if that's what's happened in the last 13 years, what does the future hold? The point that absolutely mustn't be lost is that if disruptive innovation can disrupt successful businesses, if it can disrupt entire industries, if it can disrupt an entire economy, if it can disrupt an entire nation, we can't assume the same thing can't or won't happen to education as well. Many educators think that change is something that happens elsewhere, that it happens to farmers or steelworkers or car park attendants, that somehow educators won't be affected. Don't think that traditional education will continue to be immune to the global changes that are happening all around us, because it won't. Over the course of the next decade, the education system around the world will experience the very same kind of deep and permanent disruption and ongoing reconfiguration that Amazon, iTunes, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and smartphones have brought to their respective industries. You see, with disruptive innovation or with disruption, there is always a ripple effect. Just like throwing a pebble into a pond, the ripples get bigger and bigger over time. And as these ripples grow in size, so does the disruption that happens in our life. So what does all this disruption mean for education? If education is going to stay relevant in the modern world, if education is going to fulfill our mandate of preparing students for their future and not just our past, if education is going to provide our students with the short-term and long-term skills they will need to operate in the real world beyond school, both now and in the future, if education is going to be about more than just developing the school skills students need to pass the test, the next course, or the next year, if we are going to provide them with the skills and learning opportunities they will need to thrive as citizens, parents, and workers in the culture of the 21st century, we need to think about how to do our business in a fundamentally different way than we do it now. But to do this, we must take radical changes to our business. We need to make those changes now. Without fundamental change, the future of education, an industry that is increasingly out of sync with the needs of our clients, is very bleak, to say the least. Universities can't continue to operate the way they did back in 1960 or 1990, or even the way they did back in 2019, and expect that they will be effective in the modern world. Disruptive innovation is creating a world that is fundamentally and exponentially different from the world we grew up in. And this points to a future world that will be drastically and exponentially different from the world that we live in right now. What you need to understand is that with disruptive innovation, there is always a ripple effect. With disruptive forces, there are always consequences. In particular, the way information is distributed has fundamentally changed. Disruptive technologies have created digital versions of traditional analog information delivery systems for things like newspapers, encyclopedias, textbooks. Disruptive innovation has fundamentally changed the way information is delivered to consumers. Meanwhile, many current classrooms continue to be wonderful analog information systems where information is disseminated via the voice of the teacher standing at the front of the room, which is in stark contrast to the digital multimedia delivery systems available through YouTube, Twitter, smartphones, and Google. And the problem is that when you're in the information delivery business like education is, and a better system comes along, like for example, the internet, then you either have to adapt quickly or you run the risk of quickly and permanently going out of business. That's the power of disruptive innovation. And as the former General Electric chairman, Jack Welch, commented, when the rate of change outside an organization is greater than the rate of change inside an organization, the end is in sight. Remember when you needed a travel agent to book a flight, a dealer to buy or sell a car, or a broker to buy stock, a publisher to write a book, or a journalist to report the news? Think about all the companies and industries and careers that used to exist that don't exist anymore. Companies and industries and careers that have been replaced by new ones. So as parents, citizens, educators, and educational leaders, we must understand that if the world outside of education has been transformed because of disruptive innovation and relentless global change, then we, teacher trainers, can't just pretend and continue with business as usual. Universities must urgently transform their teacher training program. Now consider just for a moment the global pandemic that has gripped the world overnight. Schools are scrambling to rethink teaching, learning, and assessment. This situation requires problem solving, collaboration, innovation, critical thinking in real time. These are all the modern skills we are talking about that educators must draw on to solve the problem they are currently facing. However, without those soft skills, many educators are struggling and feel overwhelmed. Let me be clear about what I'm saying. Our educational system is not broken. It has simply become outdated and obsolete. The problem is that our current teacher training no longer meets the needs of the present and future generations. So although we may feel comfortable with what's happening, that's the reality we are facing. What we need to understand is that new, ever-changing digital landscape combined with the pandemic has made uncertainty and rapid change the new normal in our lives. And I have to remind you that what's happening isn't just a temporary anomaly that will eventually return to the way things used to be. The world I've just described is the new normal for life and for education. So more than anything else, we just can't pretend that all we need to do is make incremental improvement to the current teacher preparation program. By let's just tinker with what we already do, add a new course, add a new test, add a new teacher requirement, and that somehow this will magically work for the 21st century. We can't just pretend that everything will be all right, because it won't. It's time for us to go back to the drawing board and redesign the teacher preparation needed for the new economy and the new world. It's time for us to acknowledge that universities, despite all the challenges that have been thrown at them, has had a good run and done a good job. Now we need to roll up our sleeves and immediately begin to shift our training and delivery model. Because in a world that constantly demands more and more, we must be able to do much better than we are doing right now. This shouldn't come as a surprise. Over the course of the past 20 years, disruptive innovations have revolutionized the way people get news, communicate, listen to music, shop, and do business. Because believe me, nobody that's virtually listening to this presentation or in this virtual room wants their school or university or job to become the next Blockbuster or Kodak or Encyclopedia Britannica or Radio Shack or Toys R Us or Nokia. Don't assume that the same thing that happened to them can't or won't happen to traditional education as well. Don't think that education is somehow immune to the global changes that are happening everywhere out there, because it isn't. If it can happen to an entire country, it can happen to us. Over the next decade, the education system will experience the very same kind of deep and permanent disruption and reconfiguration to education of teachers that Amazon, iTunes, Google, and smartphones have brought to their respective industries. That's disruptive innovation. And it's coming right at you. It's coming at your jobs. Look out, or you're going to get caught with your paradigms down. So what does all this mean for the future of teacher education? The lives of today's students are very different from the lives of students for whom the existing education systems were developed. So how can our teacher training equip our new teachers so that they in turn can prepare young people to navigate their way through an increasingly interconnected and complex world in which factual recall may matter less than a student's ability to understand differing perspectives? In my experience, education systems, or should I say universities, hardly ever talk to schools, or for that matter, businesses, employers, parents, or a whole range of stakeholders who are on the demand side of the competencies which they are supposed to facilitate learners to acquire. So what is the future of teacher education and preparation? What is training going to look like? Will this preparation pretty much be like what we know it to be today? Only with lots more technology? Of course not. What we need is greater collaboration. Greater collaboration between universities and schools must take place, whether through practicums, practice teaching, work placement, school involvement in course planning, or representatives brought into school prep classes to demonstrate the real-world application of theories, techniques, and strategies. Greater collaboration is key to improving training teachers and their readiness for work. Just like with the business sector, students are employed as apprentices and trained on the job by their employers, while also attending college or university 1 or 2 days a week. To adequately prepare future teachers, Salvet and Senge recommend that educational faculties in charge of teacher training will benefit by adopting an apprenticeship model. Now, this model allows for training teachers to learn from experts and immediately applying that learning within their context. This system and the resulting close interaction has proved very successful. And I know you thinking, yeah, we already do that. But once a term or week to observe or teach a lesson is not what we're talking about here and is not enough. University education today must model good practice. It should no longer be defined by a lecturer standing in front of the room talking. Education today has competition. There are many new options for learning, and the most innovative ones don't even have the word school or university in them. We therefore cannot release newly qualified teachers into schools equipped with 20th century skills and expect them to understand, use, and compete with other possibilities that their students are already using, like mobile devices and social networks and cloud-based learning and video games and learning apps and massive online open courses or MOOCs and gaming and flipped learning and personalized learning playlists and blended and hybrid learning and streaming video and virtual learning environments. All of these options I've described are far more compelling, creative, relevant, and social for the digital generations that we're talking about than the traditional forced march through the curriculum that many students experience today. Now, because of these developments, what we're seeing is the gradual separation of teaching and learning from buildings called universities. When we look at the trends, the power, pressure, and attraction of disruptive innovation forces us to constantly change and learn or run the risk of becoming irrelevant. So as parents, as citizens, and educators, at all costs, we don't want to be in the position of doing the wrong thing well, because increasingly, there is little interest or market for obsolete excellence. This isn't just a matter of education being good at what we do. It is also about what we do being relevant to the present and the future needs of our clients who just so happen to be our future teachers. Fourth, adaptive technologies can already replace much of what teachers have traditionally done. In the rapidly growing age of artificial intelligence, how much longer will students really need a school or a teacher to learn algebra or physics? Based on current trends, I believe that teachers who are unwilling or unable to change will become extremely vulnerable to the shifts in the ever-changing labor market. So the question we need to ask, will teachers who are only information dispensers and book readers and babysitters and multiple choice quiz givers be automated and have their jobs eliminated? However, remember, AI and apps won't replace teachers. At least apps can't replace good teachers, because the most powerful technology, the killer app in the classroom for the 21st century, is and will continue to be a great teacher. But given the way teachers are currently trained, once qualified, most teachers teach in exactly the same way they were taught when they were in school. And that brings me to the fifth point. Our students learn differently. It's time we acknowledge what research has already confirmed, that our students learn differently. Raised on multimedia, for them, virtual communications has become the new standard. Visual communication has become the new normal. And things haven't stopped there. Their world has moved even further beyond visual communication to a new video standard. The younger generation's worlds have fewer words and a greater number of images. Their brains are wired for the fast delivery of content, data, and images from computers, video games, and the internet. This is why students are quickly moving beyond Google to using YouTube. because YouTube is far more engaging to them than traditional reading and writing. YouTube is packaged for their consumption. YouTube is active, engaging, visual, social, diverse, non-linear, mobile. It's adaptive micro-learning that's broken down into bite-sized chunks in ways that promote consumption. Traditional learning, therefore, must compete with this kind of always-on bite-sized learning. To succeed, we absolutely must rewire teacher education, or we run the risk of losing this generation of media-immersed, tech-savvy students. Beyond this, you have to understand that universities are decaying, at least in their current form, and they're exorbitantly expensive. Without quick thinking and rapid adaptation, only the most prestigious universities will survive into the next century, and probably only as cultural relics, niche training and certification institutions such as medical schools and law schools, etc. Universities simply cannot survive as they now exist. Thomas Friedman, author of the best-selling book, The World is Flat, states that the skills students need to be successful in university are a different set of skills, not to mention a lesser set of skills than the skills needed to be successful in life and work when they leave university. And he goes on to say that a 4-year degree is no longer enough, and that in many cases, getting a 4-year degree makes little sense and is not a good investment of time or money. Filling the knowledge gas tank when the field already has and will likely be radically different by the time this year's student teachers graduate. So my greatest fear is that despite our very best intentions to do what's right, we still continue to do a terrific job of preparing our prospective teachers for a world that increasingly doesn't exist. In the end, we have to ask this question: what should we be doing if we want to match what goes on during teacher preparation at university and real life in school, where they must help equip students for their future and not our past? Now, there's a default future that's rushing towards us. The default future is what will happen if educational faculties stay the current course and don't take action. The default future will happen in spite of you and your level of comfort or discomfort with what's happening. Not taking actions means you are accepting the default future. There are many reasons why traditional organizations and institutions fail in the face of disruptive innovation. It's either because they are unaware of the changes going on around them, or they are unwilling to respond to those changes, or they're so mired in their organizational paradigms that they are simply unable to change. My hope is that this presentation has now made you aware of what's going on in schools, as well as the world outside of education, and why it's so critical that you respond. So that the question is, now that you are aware, are you willing and able to lead out the necessary changes? If so, then now is the time to start. We face a depth and breadth. Or are we going to deny it, resist it, or accept the fact that we too must change? We can't go backward. We can't stand still. We must move forward. And if we do not disrupt ourselves, somebody or something will eventually disrupt us. It's easy to sit back and wait for things to happen. The question is, are we going to be survivors or victims? It's time to stop asking what will happen if we do this and start asking what will happen if we don't. Sometimes we only get one chance. And remember, whether we like it or not, whether we are ready or not, whether we want it or not, shift happens. We can't just wait for the paradigm shift to hit the fan. Maintaining the status quo may save you money in the short term, but the reality is that complacency can get expensive when you consider what's at stake. So thank you so much. And I have some resources for you. you can take this link. Remember, it's case sensitive, and there are quite a few resources there for you that it's actually research and resources that back this presentation. And when you click on that link, this is what it'll take you to. And there's a whole bunch of resources that you can access. And also, if you need anything, there's my contact details, also my husband's contact details. And if we can be of help in any way, please be in touch. Thank you.